Outdoor adventures promise excitement and freedom, but for some, they end in unthinkable horror. From deadly expeditions to survival trips gone wrong, these are the worst tragedies ever recorded, and we have the proof to back them up. Get ready for a gripping hour of real-life stories that will leave you speechless. This is 1 hour of the worst deaths in the history of outdoor adventures, with proof.
July 14th, 2001. In Australia's Northern Territory, Peter Falconio, a 28-year-old British backpacker, was exploring the outback with his girlfriend, Joanne Lees. The couple had been on a thrilling adventure, traveling in their orange Volkswagen Combi van, enjoying the freedom and beauty of Australia's rugged landscapes. But what was supposed to be a memorable trip turned into a nightmare that would forever haunt Falconio's family, the authorities, and the public. Peter Falconio was described as adventurous. Alongside Joanne Lees, he had been exploring the wild terrains of Australia for months. They were no strangers to the challenges of traveling through remote areas, but nothing could have prepared them for the horror that awaited them that night. As they drove along the isolated Stewart Highway, a vehicle approached them from behind. The driver, later identified as Bradley John Murdoch, a known drug runner, signaled for them to pull over, claiming there were sparks coming from their van. Falconio, thinking it was a mechanical issue, stopped to check, but it was a trap. Murdoch had planned something far more sinister. When Falconio stepped out of the van, Murdoch shot him. While Falconio's body was never found, it's believed he was killed instantly. Inside the van, Joanne Lees suddenly found herself in a fight for her life. Murdoch, who had just killed her boyfriend, turned his attention to her. Lees tried to escape, but Murdoch quickly restrained her with cable ties and forced her into his vehicle. However, Lees managed to free herself when Murdoch was distracted, likely dealing with Falconio's body. Seizing the opportunity, she ran into the darkness of the outback, disappearing into the thin scrub. For hours, Lees hid, terrified that Murdoch would find her. Murdoch searched for her, but eventually gave up and drove away, taking Falconio's body with him. The location where Murdoch disposed of Falconio's body remains a mystery to this day. Lees eventually flagged down a passing truck driver, who took her to a nearby roadhouse in Barrow Creek, where the police were contacted. By the time authorities arrived, Murdoch was long gone, leaving behind only a small amount of blood, later confirmed to be Falconio's. Despite extensive searches, Falconio's body was never found, and the case remained unsolved for 4 years. In 2005, a breakthrough finally came. Advances in forensic science led to the identification of Bradley Murdoch as the prime suspect. DNA evidence found on Lees's t-shirt matched Murdoch's, directly linking him to the crime. Murdoch, who had a history of violence and drug trafficking, was arrested and charged with Falconio's murder and Lees's abduction. The trial was highly publicized, with Joanne Lees testifying about the terrifying events and her miraculous escape. Despite Murdoch's claims of innocence, the evidence was overwhelming, leading to his conviction. In December 2005, Murdoch was sentenced to life imprisonment with a non-parole period of 28 years. Yet, even with Murdoch behind bars, the case was far from over. The location of Peter Falconio's body remains unknown, a fact that continues to torment his family. Over the years, various searches and potential leads have ended in disappointment, and despite advances in forensic science, Falconio's remains have never been found. Joanne Lees, who survived this horrifying ordeal, has tried to move on, but the events of that night continue to shadow her life. She returned to the outback in an emotional attempt to find Falconio's body, but her search was unsuccessful. Lees maintains a close relationship with Falconio's family, and together they continue to grieve the loss of Peter, whose final resting place remains a mystery.
It was the morning of September 27, 2014, and Izumi Noguchi, a 59-year-old man from Japan, was hiking Mount Antake. What was supposed to be a peaceful morning of walking and reconnecting with nature turned into a tragedy of massive proportions. Izumi never made it off the mountain alive. At 59 years old, Izumi was a construction company employee. An avid hiker, he enjoyed taking walks in the middle of nature, often accompanied by his wife, Hiromi. That morning, though, Hiromi had to work and was unable to join Izumi on the hike. However, Izumi had a plan so that his wife could still enjoy the views of the mountain. He decided to bring his camera along on the hike and take as many pictures as he could. The morning was more than beautiful. It was perfect for hiking. The weather was balmy, the sky was clear, and the autumn leaves had just begun to turn. Since the weather was so good and it was a Saturday, Izumi was far from being the only person hiking Mount Antake that day. Mount Antake, standing over 10,000 feet tall, is a popular tourist destination, especially because its slopes are gentle and its trails are accessible. The mountain attracts seasoned hikers and novices alike. But Mount Ontake is no ordinary mountain. It is, in fact, an active volcano, the second highest in Japan. Izumi Noguchi took multiple pictures as he hiked, hoping to show them to his wife. When he reached Mount Ontake, the 59-year-old posed for a picture. The picture shows a smiling Izumi posing next to a sign stating the mountain's altitude. Izumi looks proud of his accomplishment. But things quickly took a dark turn. It was 11:52 a.m., just a short while after Izumi reached the summit, when the unimaginable happened. The serene beauty of the morning was shattered in a flash as a violent explosion shook the ground. Mount Ontake, which is a volcano, erupted. The eruption spewed ash, rocks, and scorching hot gases into the sky, creating a monstrous plume that could be seen for miles. It was a breathtaking sight, as unique as it was terrifying. Izumi grabbed his camera and began to document the disaster. He took a few photos showing the enormous plume of ash and smoke as it billowed from the crater, darkening the sky and engulfing the mountain. The next photos captured the cloud of ash and gases growing larger and advancing. A final image shows the ash cloud almost upon Izumi Noguchi. The cloud looks solid, as if it is a wall of gray obscuring the landscape. The danger seems imminent. Izumi wasn't the only individual who decided to take pictures of the disaster, nor was he the only one to be killed in the violent eruption. It remains unknown whether he believed there would be enough time to outrun the calamity. What is known, however, is that the eruption unleashed rocks and debris at speeds of up to 190 miles per hour. Some of those rocks struck Izumi Noguchi, killing him. Most of the victims succumbed to injuries caused by the flying rocks. Izumi's body was found near the summit's shrine compound. Many of the deceased bore the marks of the disaster, with numerous fractures and lacerations, particularly on the head and back. Many of them died running. Izumi's camera was found next to his body. The camera was dented, but the microchip was intact. As such, his haunting pictures could be recovered. Izumi's wife Hiromi later made the images public as a tribute to her husband's memory. Hiromi said she wished Izumi had fled instead of taking pictures. "I'd rather have him back," she added. There were hundreds of hikers on the mountain that day. 63 of them, including Izumi Noguchi, died in what was the deadliest volcanic disaster in Japan since World War II. Despite increased seismic activity detected prior to the eruption, Japanese authorities said there were no significant earthquakes to signal the impending disaster. Simon Gauthier, a 27-year-old French art history student studying in Italy, set out to explore the untamed beauty of the coastline near Belvedere di Ciolandrea, in the municipality of San Giovanni a Piero, Italy. It was supposed to be a leisurely hike, but fate had other plans. That Friday, Simon was heading from Policastro Busentino towards Naples, eager to explore the natural beauty that had captured his imagination. At that point, he had lived in Italy for 2 years. Simon lived in Rome, where he worked on his thesis. This trek was supposed to be an escape. Before embarking on his hike, the 27-year-old sent his family a photo of his backpack, perhaps a sign of his excitement and readiness for what was to come. However, what was supposed to be a day of discovery turned into a tragedy. At some point during his hike, while navigating treacherous terrain, luck left Simon. The young man fell down a cliff, breaking both of his legs in the process. The pain was excruciating, something he'd never experienced before. But Simon was alive and conscious. He knew he had to call for help. Despite the pain and panic he must have felt, Simon Gauthier managed to call emergency services. He told them he was in the middle of nowhere on the coast and that he could see the sea, but he didn't know where he was. He added he was dying of pain. Sadly, Simon's words were prophetic. Not even an hour later, he was dead due to severe blood loss. Simon probably spent his last moments on Earth in pain and afraid, waiting to be rescued. But unbeknownst to him, the authorities were facing a few issues. The rugged area where Simon fell made it nearly impossible to pinpoint his exact location. Italian emergency services, hampered by the lack of geolocation technology for emergency calls, a system proposed as early as 2009 but never implemented, struggled to organize an effective search. The delay was critical. According to some sources, it took 28 hours for the rescue teams to commence their search. Simon's friends and family, who had, in the meantime, traveled from France to aid in the rescue efforts, were devastated and disappointed by the perceived delays and inefficiencies. As days passed, over 100 rescuers, including firefighters, alpine rescuers, and a helicopter team, were deployed to scour the perilous terrain and cliffs. But there was no sign of Simon, and of course, nobody knew he was long gone. The search was complicated and tricky. It involved teams scanning the area with drones, binoculars, and even employing bloodhounds to follow any potential lead. On August 19, 2019, after 10 agonizing days, a rescuer spotted Simon Gautier's backpack through binoculars. Soon after, the rescuers found spots of blood near the backpack, leading them to his lifeless body at the bottom of a ravine. His remains were finally retrieved, but the discovery brought little solace to those who had clung to hope for a different outcome. A preliminary investigation revealed that Simon had likely succumbed to his injuries within 40 to 45 minutes of his fall, having severed an artery in his leg and bled to death. This added another layer to the tragedy, but also a strange kind of solace, since Simon didn't actually suffer for days, the way his friends and family had feared. In the aftermath, Simon's parents considered launching an inquest into the circumstances surrounding his death, questioning the efficiency of the rescue operation. The president of the Italian 118 emergency response system highlighted the glaring inadequacies in Italy's emergency services, emphasizing that Simon could have been swiftly geolocated and possibly saved if the 2009 EU directive on the geolocation of emergency calls had been implemented.
Trevor Holminski, a 20-year-old who had a deep love for the outdoors, was so passionate about nature. His documentary, A Blue Crow, showcased his wilderness survival skills. Just as he was about to join the Marines, Trevor wanted an adventure for the final time, so he planned a camping trip with his friend, Sheldon Stewart, in August 2015. They both went to Bucks Lake in Northern California, excited for days of hiking and exploring. Trevor's mother, Allison, remembered how happy he was about the trip, completely ignorant of the tragedy that was about to happen. Trevor and Sheldon set up camp at Bucks Lake and enjoyed the beautiful views the place offered. However, as night came, their behavior became totally strange after taking LSD and marijuana. The events of that night would go on to have a devastating effect, leading to a sad outcome that shocked the community. As the night went on, Trevor and Sheldon's attitude became increasingly crazy. They went around the campsite with their senses dulled by the drugs they had taken. The exact details of what happened that night are not exactly clear, but it's clear there was some kind of fight. Sheldon later claimed that Trevor had attacked him, but the evidence suggested something much more complicated. In the early morning of August 22, 2015, firefighters who were attending to a bushfire at Bucks Lake discovered something scary. While trying to calm the fire, they found Sheldon stabbed with multiple wounds on his neck. Nearby, a burned body was found in the campfire pit, with smoke still rising from the remains. The investigation had just started, but it was evident that something tragic and sinister had occurred at Bucks Lake. As detectives started questioning Sheldon, he told them a scary story about what had happened the night before. However, as they continued to investigate, they found a lot of inconsistencies in his story, leading them to uncover the truth. As the investigation progressed, detectives realized that the burned body in the campfire pit was actually Trevor's. The autopsy revealed he had been stabbed multiple times before being set on fire. With this new evidence, Sheldon's story began to appear stupid, and he soon became the main suspect in Trevor's murder. Detectives continued questioning Sheldon, but his alibi made no sense. He had said Trevor attacked him, but the evidence told a different story. The wounds on Sheldon's neck looked like they were self-inflicted, and the knife used to kill Trevor was later found buried near the campsite, together with Trevor's wallet and ID. As the evidence continued to increase, Sheldon's story began to change. With the case against him growing stronger, Sheldon was charged with Trevor's murder. During the trial, Sheldon claimed that Trevor had made unwanted romantic advances, which he rejected, and that led to a serious fight. The prosecution, however, wasn't going to have any of Sheldon's story, arguing that his story was not consistent and hard to believe. The prosecutor mentioned that Stewart's lawyers argued he was under the influence of LSD and had only acted in self-defense. However, the prosecutor believed the evidence showed otherwise. Eventually, Sheldon confessed that he had caused Trevor's demise because Trevor had asked to be out of his misery. What that meant isn't exactly clear. The exact details of that night remain unclear. But Sheldon was found guilty of first-degree murder and arson. The jury verdict was that Sheldon was guilty, and he was sentenced to 26 years to life in prison for his crimes. 36-year-old Lisa Schilling, her 12-year-old daughter, Lily Arguello, and a few other family members arrived at Buckhorn Canyon for a relaxing holiday on Wednesday, July 13th, 2022. They were returning to their favorite camping spot, a place they loved as a retreat from city life, after the area had been affected by the Cameron Peak fire 2 years earlier. Annette Vasquez, Lisa's sister-in-law and Lily's aunt, described Buckhorn Canyon as a special place full of memories. She said that the family had spent many summers there, introducing their spouses and raising their children away from the distractions of modern life. For them, the canyon wasn't just a campsite, it was a wonderful part of their family history. Lisa was a fourth-grade teacher at Dean Elementary who had plans to transfer to Bear Creek Elementary. Her daughter Lily, who was about to enter the 8th grade, was eagerly waiting for her 13th birthday on July 27th. On Friday, July 15th, during their camping trip, it began to rain, causing the nearby creek to rise a few inches. Although the rain soon stopped, it had already set the stage for a sad turn of events. Vasquez recounted a chilling moment when a loud rumbling sound echoed through the campsite. Looking up the creek, they saw a terrifying sight. A huge wall of trees, rocks, mud and water rushed towards them with great force. In a flash, the trailer where Lisa, Lily and their 2 dogs were staying was caught in the flood. The powerful flow of water swept the trailer away, and within moments, it was overwhelmed. Sadly, Lisa, Lily and their pets drowned as the flood filled the trailer, which was later confirmed to be the cause of their deaths. Around 5 p.m., the Larimer County Sheriff's Office began receiving reports of flooding in the area. By 7:30 p.m., rescuers found Lisa and her daughter Lily just over half a mile from their campsite on Calcite Court. Sadly, their deaths were ruled accidental. The sad event left their family devastated, adding to the deep grief they were already experiencing from their recent losses. Her family and friends have come together to support Lisa's husband during this hard time, even setting up an online fundraiser to help with expenses. As of July 19th, 2022, the GoFundMe page had raised nearly $14,000 out of its $25,000 goal. August 23rd, 2016, in Home Hill, Queensland, Australia, Mia Alif Chung, a 21-year-old from Derbyshire, and Thomas Jackson, a 30-year-old from Cheshire, were among the backpackers staying at Shelley's Backpackers Hostel. Mia, full of life and eager to see the world before settling down, had quickly become popular among the other travelers. Thomas, a seasoned traveler with a compassionate heart, had spent years exploring different countries, teaching English and helping others along the way. That night, the hostel was unusually quiet as everyone wound down after a long day of farm work. But the peace would soon be shattered by a horrifying act of violence. Smail Ayad, a 29-year-old French backpacker, was in a state of psychosis, allegedly influenced by cannabis. His mind was distorted, and what happened next would leave everyone in shock. Around 11:15 p.m., Ayad launched a brutal knife attack on Mia. The attack was sudden and vicious, leaving Mia with multiple stab wounds. Despite the terror and pain, Mia managed to escape and lock herself in a bathroom, but the damage was already done. Another backpacker, Daniel Richards, found Mia in the bathroom, bloodied and terrified. Without hesitation, he raised the alarm, his shouts being heard all over the place. Hearing the commotion, Thomas Jackson rushed to the scene, unaware of the danger that awaited him. Thomas found Mia and quickly realized how serious the situation was. Despite the clear danger, he chose to stay with her, trying to comfort and protect her. His bravery would soon cost him his life. Ayad, who had earlier jumped from a balcony in a bizarre attempt to fly, re-entered the hostel, still armed with the knife. He was shouting and gesturing erratically. Unaware of Ayad's violent intent, Thomas initially went to help him. This act of kindness turned into a tragic mistake. Ayad forced his way into the bathroom, where Thomas was trying to shield Mia. In a horrifying twist, he turned his rage on Thomas, stabbing him repeatedly. Thomas sustained at least 12 separate injuries, with the fatal blow being a stab wound to the brain. His heroic efforts to save Mia ended in his own violent death. Mia was pronounced dead at the scene, her life cut short by Ayad's senseless violence. Thomas, though gravely injured, was still alive. He was rushed to Townsville Hospital and placed on life support, but after 6 agonizing days, he succumbed to his injuries on August 30th, 2016. The tragedy shocked everyone. A Queensland coroner's report in 2020 stated that Ayad was psychotic and under the influence of cannabis during the attack. Criminal proceedings against him were dropped, as he was deemed not of sound mind. The inquest into Thomas's death revealed the full horror of the events, but also highlighted his incredible courage. Assistant Coroner Peter Siggy described Thomas's actions as great courage and valor. Thomas's family was devastated by the loss. His parents, Leslie and Sandra, spoke about the unbearable pain of losing their son. "We think about him all the time," Leslie said, his voice heavy with grief. Sandra added, "I'll never get over it. You just learn to live with it." His sister, Liv, expressed her heartbreak on Facebook, urging others to remember Thomas not as a victim, but as a friend who brought joy and kindness to the world. Thomas's bravery was honored after his death with the Queen's Gallantry Medal, one of the highest awards for acts of courage. His mother received the medal on his behalf from Prince William at Buckingham Palace. Thomas was also honored in Queensland for his heroic efforts, but even these privileges couldn't erase the reality of the loss. Thomas Jackson was gone, his life cut short by an act of senseless violence, but his courage and selflessness would never be forgotten. April 2017, when a mysterious man appeared on the Appalachian Trail. He introduced himself as mostly harmless, but some hikers called him Denim because of his jeans. He carried a large backpack, a notebook filled with code, and a quiet personality. Friendly yet reserved, he intrigued those he met, but what truly set him apart was his lack of a real identity. No one knew his name, past, or what brought him to the trail. It took over 2 years and countless efforts to finally uncover who he really was. The Appalachian Trail is a 200-mile stretch of rugged terrain that attracts thousands of hikers each year. For many, it's a place of solitude and healing, filled with moments of trail magic, unexpected acts of kindness. Mostly Harmless seemed to embody this spirit. He appeared to be searching for something, perhaps peace or escape, and found it in the wilderness. But by July 2018, the man who wandered the trails would be found dead in a yellow tent in Florida's Big Cypress National Preserve. His body, undernourished and weighing just 83 pounds, was discovered by 2 hikers. The smell from the tent led them to the lifeless form of Mostly Harmless. He had no identification, phone or wallet, nothing to give authorities a clue about who he was. This discovery launched a complex and heartbreaking investigation. The authorities were puzzled. Here was a man with no tattoos, just an abdominal scar, and no matches in any fingerprint or DNA database. Despite the $3,500 in cash found in his tent and ample food supplies, his cause of death was undetermined. It was clear he had been living off the grid, but the reason for his death remained a mystery. What could drive a man to isolate himself so completely that not a single person came forward to claim him? As word of the unidentified hiker spread, a sketch of his face circulated on social media, drawing the interest of amateur detectives and hikers who had met him. Online communities began piecing together the story of Mostly Harmless. Some recognized him as the man they had met on the Appalachian Trail, a kind, warm, but deeply private individual. These detectives were determined to uncover his identity. Facebook groups formed, members devoted their time to solving the mystery, calling local police, combing through missing persons reports, and sharing any information they could find. Their dedication was relentless, driven by a desire to bring closure to the mystery of Mostly Harmless. In July 2020, a significant breakthrough came when members of a Facebook group raised enough money for a DNA analysis. The results pointed to southern Louisiana, leading to the discovery that Mostly Harmless was actually Vance John Rodriguez, born in 1976, near Baton Rouge. Rodriguez's story was tragic. He was a loner who struggled with mental health issues. Those who knew him described him as troubled, with a history of abusive behavior towards women and an obsession with coding. The scar on his abdomen was from a self-harm attempt at age 15, a wound that nearly claimed his life. Although he survived, the pain he carried never fully healed. In 2017, Rodriguez abandoned his life, leaving his New York City apartment, passport, wallet and credit cards behind. He decided to disappear into the wilderness. For 15 months, he wandered the Appalachian Trail, making connections but always maintaining a distance. He never revealed his true identity and never stayed long in one place. One of the most remarkable connections he made was with a hiker named Brandon Dowell. They met in Georgia and bonded over their tough childhoods and strained relationships with their fathers. But when it was time to part ways, Rodriguez refused to stay in touch. He was determined to remain anonymous. When Dowell later heard about a body found in Florida, he didn't immediately connect it to the man he met on the trail. But when photos of Mostly Harmless circulated online, he realized the kind hiker he met was the same man whose identity had baffled authorities. Identifying Vance John Rodriguez answered some questions, but raised others. How did a man who made so many connections end up dying alone and unrecognized for so long? What drove him to such extreme isolation? Why did no one from his past come forward during the 2 years his identity remained a mystery? The story of Mostly Harmless reflects how we perceive others. On the trail, Rodriguez was seen as kind and harmless, bringing warmth and friendship to those he met. But his life was far more complicated. He was burdened by his past.
1st, 2021. Sophia Chung, a social media influencer from Hong Kong, was on a day trip to Ha Pak Lai, a scenic nature park near the famed Pineapple Mountain. Sophia and her friends wanted to explore the park and maybe take some pictures for her Instagram account, on which she had tens of thousands of followers. But the woman never got the chance to post the pictures from this particular trip. At 32 years old, Sophia was known on social media for her daring stunts and breathtaking shots. She had a real passion for nature photography and would often amaze her followers with her risky photos. That July morning, Sophia and her friends arrived at Ha Pak Lai around 11 a.m., ready to explore and capture the stunning scenery. Ha Pak Lai is a popular park located near the city of Hong Kong. With its lush landscapes and rugged trails, the park offers a tranquil escape. One of the park's notable features is the Tsingdai Stream, which cascades into a waterfall, creating a stunning yet dangerous spot for photography. Sophia, who was known for her fearless approach to photography, ventured to the edge of the waterfall to snap the perfect shot. Sophia's Instagram, filled with stunning photos of her hiking, kayaking, and exploring, painted a picture of a life lived on the edge. Her bio read, "Life should be fun, not dumb." As she posed for a selfie on the edge of the waterfall, Sophia's footing slipped, and she plummeted 16 feet into the pool below. Her horrified friends immediately notified emergency services, who rushed to the scene and pulled her from the water. She was rushed to the hospital, but despite everyone's swift efforts, Sophia Chung was pronounced dead at Pamela Yude Nethersole Eastern Hospital at 7:59 p.m. News of Sophia's death traveled fast, but while her admirers mourned her, others believe Sophia was fully responsible for her death. In recent years, there has been a disturbing rise in fatalities linked to selfie taking, with people often pushing the limits of safety to capture extraordinary images. From nauseating cliff edges to towering heights, the pursuit of social media popularity has driven individuals to take unnecessary risks, sometimes with fatal consequences.
Lauren Chamberlain was born on June 11, 1980. Her family was camping at Ayers Rock, now known as Uluru, in the Northern Territory. Azaria went missing from the family tent when she was just 9 weeks old. Her parents, Lindy and Michael Chamberlain, said a dingo had taken her. 3 people also reported hearing Azaria's cries the night she vanished from the family's campsite at Uluru. Lindy Chamberlain also said she saw a dingo coming out of the tent, and dingo tracks were found around and inside the tent. Large amounts of blood from Azaria were found on the tent mattress, on other items, near the carry basket where she had been sleeping, and next to the dingo tracks. After the alarm was raised, Aboriginal and white trackers followed the dingo prints until they mixed with human shoe prints on the road. They discovered drag marks in the sand and 2 shallow spots where something had been placed, likely while the dingo rested. These spots showed the imprint of a knitted garment, and there were tiny dark patches nearby, which they suspected to be blood. An investigation was conducted to find out what had happened because of the unusual and suspicious circumstances surrounding the event. This investigation ran from December 15, 1980 to February 20, 1981, and was just the first of several investigations into Azaria's death. The investigator, Dennis Barrett, concluded that it was a dingo that snatched and caused Azaria's death. The Chamberlains were found not to be involved in their child's disappearance. Soon enough, rumors started to spread, partly started by some members of the media and police. Although the first inquest concluded that Azaria had been attacked by a dingo and criticized the police for their poor work, some officers were reportedly opposed to accepting the dingo theory. They believed their evidence against the Chamberlains was more reliable. Feeling attacked by the coroner's findings, some decided to set things right in their view. 8 months later, a nationwide operation called Operation Ochre was launched, during which police searched the Chamberlains' home and seized many items. At the same time, all eyewitnesses were visited by police who asked for statements. It soon became clear what their focus was. When eyewitnesses described what they had seen or heard, police told them they did not want to hear about a dingo and insisted it was a murder investigation. The first inquest findings were thrown away, and the second inquest did not make a finding, but out of nowhere decided that the Chamberlains should stand trial. Afterwards, Lindy Chamberlain was charged with murder, while Michael Chamberlain was charged as an accessory to murder. With Judge Justice Muirhead and a jury presiding over their trial, it began on February 13, 1982, in Darwin. The media heavily covered the trial, mostly in a negative light towards the Chamberlains. One of the most shocking claims during the trial was that dingoes do not attack humans. The prosecutor, Ian Barker QC, reportedly dismissed the evidence of the drag marks as a red herring and focused instead on the bloodstains found in the family's car. The jury held both parents guilty on October 29, 1982. Lindy Chamberlain was convicted of murdering her baby, based on the idea that she had cut Azaria's throat in the family car and hid the body in a camera case. The evidence included a blood-stained jumpsuit found near the site where she went missing and a forensic report suggesting fetal hemoglobin. Lindy Chamberlain was sentenced to life in prison on October 19, 1982, while Michael Chamberlain received an 18-month jail sentence, which was later suspended because their children, Aidan and Reagan, needed a parent to care for them. The Chamberlains made several unsuccessful appeals, including a final one to the High Court. A breakthrough finally came in 1986. Azaria's jacket was found in an area with many dingo lairs, which led to Lindy's release from prison. On September 15, 1988, the Northern Territory Court of Criminal Appeals threw away all convictions against Lindy and Michael. A third investigation in 1995 resulted in an open finding. At a fourth inquest on June 12, 2012, Coroner Elizabeth Morris concluded that a dingo had taken Azaria and caused her death. After her release, Lindy was compensated with $1.3 million for false imprisonment, and an amended death certificate was issued. 31st, 2019, in Peru's Yanachaga-Camillan National Park, 25-year-old British backpacker Elizabeth "Lizzie" Orchard set out on a trek she had planned for months. An environmental enthusiast, Lizzie was exploring South America with her sister Rachel and Rachel's boyfriend, Callum Jones. They had been hiking through the dense forests, admiring the untouched beauty of the region. Lizzie was not an ordinary traveler. Her love for the environment led her to places others might avoid. This wasn't her first solo hike, but it would be her last. That day, Lizzie, Rachel and Callum began a hike on a trail in the park. Lizzie was determined to reach a summit she believed was just 20 minutes away, promising a stunning view. Rachel and Callum, exhausted and suffering from blisters, decided to turn back. Though they were reluctant to leave Lizzie alone, she assured them she'd be fine and insisted on continuing alone. They headed back to their hostel, expecting to meet her later that evening. As the sun set, the forest around Lizzie grew darker and colder. Despite the growing darkness, Lizzie continued toward the summit. This decision would prove fatal. By the time Lizzie reached the top, night had fully set in. The stars provided little light as she began her descent. Instead of retracing her steps, Lizzie chose a different route, leading down the side of a waterfall she had seen earlier. This path was not marked. The steep, slippery terrain made every step dangerous, but Lizzie, confident in her skills, thought she could manage. As she started to climb down, her footing became uncertain. One misstep caused her to lose her balance. Lizzie tried to grab onto something but fell, plunging down the side of the waterfall. Lizzie's body tumbled down a 650-foot ravine, causing multiple fatal injuries. She landed at the bottom, her body lying still among the rocks and water. Her journey had come to a tragic end. Back at the hostel, Rachel and Callum grew worried when Lizzie didn't return. By morning, with still no sign of her, they raised the alarm. Peruvian authorities, familiar with the park's difficult terrain, launched a large search operation. Up to 50 police officers, firefighters and park rangers searched the dense forest, facing challenges from the landscape and thick canopy. For 6 days, the search continued. Lizzie's parents, Rupert and Cecilia Orchard, flew to Peru upon hearing of her disappearance, hoping for a miracle but fearing the worst. On June 6, 2019, the search team found Lizzie's body at the bottom of the Sotomayor ravine, near a path known as Orchid Way. She was still clothed, and her injuries were consistent with a fall from a great height. The search was over, but the tragedy had just begun for her family. News of Lizzie's death spread through her hometown of Greatley, Hampshire. The small village was devastated. Lizzie had been well known for her passion for the environment and love of adventure. An inquest into Lizzie's death was held in Salisbury, Wiltshire. The coroner ruled her death an accident, noting that Lizzie had likely been trying to climb down the waterfall in the dark. The cause of death was severe injuries from a fall. Lizzie's family, present in court, expressed deep sadness at losing a beloved daughter and sister. They thanked the search teams and authorities for their efforts and asked for privacy as they grieved. 2 15-year-old girls from Finland, Mila Imeli Björklund and Anja Tuulikki-Mäki, decided to go camping with their 18-year-old boyfriends, Seppo Antero Boisman and Niels Wilhelm Gustafsson, sometime in June 1960. They picked a popular spot by Lake Bodom, a peaceful lake about 22 kilometers west of Helsinki, the capital city. This was a place known for much fun, and that was just what the group planned for. The group was excited about a fun camping trip, planning to spend their time in a single tent right by the beautiful lake. In the early hours of June 5, 1960, the 4 teenagers were camping peacefully and enjoying themselves on the shores of Lake Bodom. Their day had started well, with everyone enjoying nature and the calm lake, until suddenly, things took a sad turn later that night. The unexpected happened just between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. While they were still in their tent, Björklund, Mäki and Boisman were attacked, which resulted in serious injuries for the trio from being stabbed and beaten. Gustafsson, the only one who survived, was left with serious injuries, including a concussion, a broken jaw, and several fractures on the face. Around 6 a.m., a group of boys who were out to get a sight of the different birds that flew around the lake came across the scene. They saw the collapsed tent on the lakeshore, but didn't think much of it, and so continued on their way. They later mentioned seeing a blonde man walking away from the area. It wasn't until 11 a.m. that Risto Siren, a local carpenter, found the bodies. He quickly called the police, who arrived around noon. By then, the teenagers had been dead for over 6 hours. Inside the tent, they found the bodies of Mäki and Boisman. Björklund, Gustafsson's girlfriend, was discovered on top of the tent, partly undressed and lying beside Gustafsson. She had been badly injured, with signs of being stabbed even after her death. It looked like the attacker didn't need to enter the tent. The attacker had struck the teenagers from outside. The victims were stabbed with a knife, but there were also signs of another blunt object that was used on them, though it wasn't exactly clear what it was. Adding to the mystery, some strange items were also missing. The keys to the teenagers' motorcycles were gone, but the bikes were left behind. Gustafsson's shoes were missing too, but they were later found about half a mile away, along with some of his clothes. Gustafsson was the only one who survived the attack. When police questioned him, he could only describe a shadowy figure dressed in black with glowing red eyes that attacked them brutally. The newspapers criticized the police for mishandling the case. They didn't properly record their findings or secure the crime scene, which led to the area being contaminated. After the police left, curious onlookers and careless campers made a mess of the scene. The police brought in soldiers to search for the missing items, but this only made things worse, and most of the items were never recovered. The first person suspected of the murders was Carl Valdemar Gillström, known locally as Kioskman because he ran a nearby shop. Another suspect, Hans Assmann, was of interest for many years. At the time, it was a rumor that he was a former KGB spy living near Lake Bodom. And who wouldn't be careful with spies? However, it wasn't until 44 years after the incident that the police finally arrested someone. The Lake Bodom case saw a major breakthrough sometime in March 2004. After almost 50 years, new DNA evidence led prosecutors to a suspect they believed had a motive. Technological advances in forensic science that weren't available in 1960 helped to support this new lead. The suspect turned out to be Gustafsson, the only survivor of the murders, who was then arrested and brought to trial. The police had long suspected Gustafsson and claimed they had evidence to back up their claim. They said that Gustafsson's shoes, which were found covered in the victim's blood and not his own, were worn by the killer during the attack. During the trial, the prosecution painted a story where Gustafsson, after getting drunk and being kicked out of the tent, fought with Boisman. They claimed Boisman won the fight, leaving Gustafsson with a broken jaw and facial bones. Angered, Gustafsson allegedly returned to the tent in a rage, killing his girlfriend and friends, then wounded himself and tampered with the crime scene to cover his tracks. Gustafsson's defense team argued against the prosecution's story, suggesting that if Gustafsson and Boisman had really fought, Gustafsson would have been too injured to commit the murders or to walk half a mile to hide his shoes. In October 2005, the court agreed with the defense and found Gustafsson not guilty of all charges. He was acquitted and later received €44,900 from the state of Finland for the mental distress caused by the lengthy legal process. Despite this, the case remains a mystery. No new suspects have emerged, and no additional evidence has been found, leaving the Lake Bottom murders as Finland's most notorious and unresolved camping crime. It was July 30, 1998, when Reverend Mike Turner, a 48-year-old pastor from Caldwell, Idaho, set out on a solo spiritual journey in Wyoming's wilderness. Known for his deep faith and towering 6'6" height, Mike sought comfort in nature, believing it was his way of connecting with God. He planned a 10-day hike across the Continental Divide, accompanied only by his loyal black Labrador mix, Andy. Afterward, he was supposed to reunite with his family for a camping trip, following a 3-month break from his work. But Mike never made it to that reunion. His journey turned into a battle for survival that would push him to the limits of his faith and endurance. Mike and Andy began their trek on a positive note, heading toward Eklund Lake in the Bridger-Teton National Forest. Mike described the scene in his journal as so quiet, so perfect, reflecting the peace he sought. However, things took a tragic turn on August 2nd, the 4th day of their journey. While navigating a boulder field near a mountain lake over 11,000 feet high and 16 miles from the nearest trailhead, Mike noticed Andy struggling. The dog's paws were raw from the jagged ice, and he was in pain. Concerned for Andy, Mike decided to take a longer, less direct route to ease the strain on his companion. This decision would lead to disaster. As Mike carefully moved through the boulder field, he stepped on a large rock that wobbled under his weight. In an attempt to regain his balance, he jumped to another boulder, but lost his footing and slipped between two massive rocks. The boulder he had stepped on rolled over, trapping his legs. Although it didn't crush him, he was completely immobilized. No matter how hard he tried, Mike couldn't free himself. For 2 hours, Mike struggled to escape, using everything he had on hand, but nothing worked. Alone in the wilderness, with no way to call for help, Mike began documenting his ordeal in his journal. At first, he remained hopeful, melting snow for water and using his tent's rainfly to collect dew and rain. Despite his dire situation, he kept his sense of humor, writing, "I wonder how urine will taste with crystal light." As days passed, Mike's hope faded. His journal entries grew more desperate as he feared losing his legs, running out of water, and succumbing to hypothermia. The temperature swings were brutal, with daytime highs in the 90s and nighttime lows in the 30s. Mike's body and spirit weakened as he struggled to survive. By August 5th, 4 days after becoming trapped, Mike's despair was evident. He wrote, "I feel so foolish taking this longer pass, so lonely, more than I imagined. Who would have guessed that 4 days would have gone by and no one has come this way?" Meanwhile, Mike's wife, Diane, grew increasingly worried when he didn't show up as planned. She contacted authorities, and a search began. However, because no one knew Mike had changed his route, searchers were looking in the wrong place. The vast wilderness of Wyoming's Wind River Range made the search even more challenging. Weeks passed with no sign of Mike, and the search was eventually called off. But on August 28th, nearly a month after Mike set out, a break came when Andy, the faithful Labrador, was found alive by hikers miles from where the search had been focused. This discovery reignited the search in the correct area, but it was too late. A hiker named Jeff Stewart eventually found Mike near an unnamed lake. Mike had died of exposure, hypothermia, and dehydration, likely around August 11th, 9 days after his tragic fall. His body was still trapped between the rocks. Beside him, searchers found his journal, protected in a plastic bag, with weak and shaky final entries. In his last moments, Mike had accepted his fate, writing, "I am ready to die, though missing my family. I will trust in God, though he will slay me, yet will I trust in him." Nearby, searchers also found Mike's wedding ring, placed carefully on a rock, a final gesture of love for his family. Mike's tragic death underscores the unpredictability of the wilderness, even for experienced hikers. His story raises haunting questions. What if he hadn't changed his route? What if someone had found him sooner? But in the end, Mike found a sense of peace, sustained by his faith and love for his family, even in the face of unimaginable suffering.
18, Louisa Vesterager Jespersen and Maren Juland, two friends studying at the University of Southeastern Norway, were on a trip in Morocco. But their journey, meant to be an adventure, turned into a nightmare that sparked global outrage when Louisa and Maren were targeted by terrorists. Louisa Vesterager Jespersen, a 24-year-old Danish woman, and Maren Juland, a 28-year-old Norwegian woman, arrived in Morocco on December 9, 2018, eager to explore the country's majestic landscapes. They first visited Marrakesh before setting out for the village of Imlil, a popular base for tourists wanting to trek to Mount Toubkal, North Africa's highest peak. Louisa and Maren, who were also flatmates, were passionate about outdoor recreation and nature. In fact, the two young women were studying to become tour guides. As such, they were no strangers to adventures. They were well prepared for their journey and had taken precautions. But nothing and no one could have predicted what happened to them. Unbeknownst to Louisa and Maren, as they enjoyed their vacation, 4 men had decided to show their allegiance to the Islamic State, known as ISIS, with heinous acts. These men had pledged their loyalty to the terror group in a video shared on social media prior to the attack, denouncing the enemies of Allah and vowing destruction. Their leader was 25-year-old Abdesamad Ejud, a street vendor and an underground imam. Ejud, along with 27-year-old Yunus Ouaziad and 33-year-old Rachida Fati, had agreed to carry out a terrorist act on either security services or foreign tourists. After deciding to attack foreign tourists, they traveled to Imlil to look for possible targets. A 4th man, Abderrahim Kayali, initially part of the group, decided to leave before the terrorist attack would take place, but not before instructing the other 3 on how to use encrypted messaging services and to use weapons. Abdesamad Ejud, Yunus Ouaziad, and Rachida Fati watched Louisa and Maren for 4 days before deciding to strike, choosing them specifically because they were unaccompanied by guides. They attacked the women in their camp. Ejud and Ouaziad carried out the attacks, while Fati filmed on his phone. The video shows the attackers chanting jihadist slogans as they killed Louisa and Maren. Using the slogans "Enemies of Allah" and "Revenge for our brothers in Hajin," the attackers furthered their radical goals. On the morning of December 17, 2018, 2 French hikers stumbled upon a gruesome scene. They found Louisa and Maren's decapitated bodies. Their bodies were mutilated, a chilling contrast to the peaceful surroundings. The 2 French hikers alerted the authorities, and an investigation began swiftly. In the meantime, the horrifying video of the murders was shared widely, amplifying the terror. The footage was verified as authentic by Moroccan and Norwegian authorities, and its circulation added to the already present fear and outrage. 18 individuals were arrested in connection with the murders. The primary suspects, including Ejud, Ouaziad, and Fati, were apprehended in Marrakesh while on a bus, still in possession of the murder weapons. The investigation revealed their deep-rooted connections to ISIS, with Ejud having previously been imprisoned for attempting to join the group in Syria. The 3 men were charged with the murders, while several others faced various terrorism-related charges. Many around the world believed that only the death penalty could provide justice for the victims and bring some peace to their families. The victims' families, particularly Louisa's mother, expressed their profound grief and the irreparable void left by the murders. She, too, called for the death penalty. In July 2019, Ejud, Ouaziad, and Fati were sentenced to death, despite the fact that executions have not been carried out in Morocco since 1993. Their actions, filmed in chilling detail, left no room for doubt about their guilt. Abderrahim Kayali, the 4th member of the group, was initially sentenced to life in prison, but his sentence was elevated to the death penalty. Kayali took his own life in prison, awaiting execution. The aftermath of the murders saw vigils and memorials in Morocco and the victims' home countries. In Denmark and Norway, the funerals were attended by high-ranking officials and loved ones who paid their respects to Louisa and Maren.
On September 9, 2023, the Easton family from Paul, Idaho, was enjoying what should have been a normal camping trip at the Pine Campground in Boise National Forest. Cadence Easton, their 8-year-old twin daughter, was there with her parents, Quinn and Natasha Easton, together with her 7 siblings and her twin sister London. The family had looked forward to this retreat as a chance to reconnect with each other and have some time away. Early in the morning, just around 5 a.m., tragedy struck. A large tree that had weakened over time suddenly fell on the tent where Cadence, London, and their beloved pet dog Sybil were sleeping. The impact was instantly fatal to Cadence and Sybil. A family friend, who was also camping nearby, said he had heard a loud sound and immediately rushed to the scene. Men from the Elmore County Sheriff's Office arrived promptly. Cadence was pronounced dead only shortly after their arrival, despite their best efforts to revive her. The shock and sadness of this event were overwhelming for her parents and the entire family. The tree that fell was found to be a rotting cottonwood, a type of tree that had been weakened due to age and environmental factors. Officials later stated that previous wildfires in the area might also have contributed to the tree's weakened state. Cadence was remembered fondly by everyone who knew her. Described as an exceptional child, she had a cheerful disposition and a warm, constant smile. Her family fondly recalled her deep love for animals and her special bond with their dog, Zibble, who had been curled beside her when the accident occurred. Cadence's bright and eager personality shone through in her schoolwork, and she often preferred the company of adults at family gatherings, showing maturity and intelligence beyond her years. Raised in a Christian home, she was taught to be kind. She was a child who made friends quickly and avoided getting into a fight. In response to the tragedy, a GoFundMe page was created to help the Easton family with funeral and other related expenses. The campaign has since raised over $28,000, showing the community's generosity and support. The Easton family has also expressed their gratitude for the outpouring of support and the heartfelt condolences they've received. Authorities continue to investigate the incident, looking into the effects that past wildfires may have had on the trees.